to create prosperity for children yet unborn. When we were borrowing to build the rich hospital, they said we were incompetent. When we borrowed to build Terminal 3, they said we were incompetent. When we borrowed to build regional hospitals across the country, they said we were incompetent. Now that they are borrowing to pay for kenke and fish, what will they be? So the people of Ghana must wake up, because this cannot be sustained. And we cannot go on the path of building up debt and not having anything to show for it. I'd like us to take a look at the financial sector challenges that we have. And here I'm particularly interested because since the crisis occurred, we in the NDC have not fully told our story. And so as a result, all the mishandling and incompetence of dealing with the financial sector appears to be finding its way onto our doorstep. But today, we have to tell our story. During the era of the NDC as part of the IMF program, one of the things that we signed up to deal with was to address the financial sector challenges. Your Excellency, your team was very focused in addressing this in a way that did not provide social dislocation, but that ensured that we had a financial sector that was broad in leverage, but that also supported Ghanaian entrepreneurship as a means of keeping our own businesses in our hands. At the time, the managers of the central bank decided to engage in a number of activities in order to strengthen the financial sector and make the sector very robust. These actions range from fiscal reforms to legal reforms and to clearly intervening in managing the capital adequacies that were existing. And so the NDC government recruited KPMG and Pricewaterhouse to do what we call the asset quality review to give us a sense of where we were with our financial sector. Your Excellency, at the time, it became very clear when we got the report that we needed to validate that report one more time. And so we recruited another firm, the same group of people, to go back in 2016 and validate the numbers. They came back with the same report that several financial institutions or banks, a number of them, were having challenges to do with the financial sector challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, the report made it quite clear that some of the challenges emanated from the energy sector SOE's debt on the books of the banks. Some returned saying that the SMEs had also burdened the financial sector. And some of the reasons we got was that we needed to improve corporate governance and improve the institutional arrangement to ensure that reforms in the banking sector were anchored. As a result, we took pragmatic steps to address these holistically. I know my good friend, Honorable Atufosin, shepherded a number of bills that became laws in order to reform the banking sector. We put together a sustainable law called the Banking and Special, Deposit-Taking Institutions Act, 1930. This was to address weaknesses in the legal framework for making sure that the central bank had proper grip on the banking sector, but also to give the central bank powers that it didn't have, that it needed to have. So those lawyers on the other side, who when they see anything that was done, will just pick the Act 930 and blame NDC. Tell them Act 930 was passed somewhere around October 2016. And laws are not applied retroactively. So if something happened in the banking sector like we found with the Capital Bank in 2015, it is the reason we had to pass a new law to address those specific challenges that we had found that needed to be addressed. Again, we realized that the Bank of Ghana itself needed some autonomy and needed to strengthen its own corporate governance systems. So we amended the Bank of Ghana Act in order to give it more flexibility and give it a better corporate governance image. Mr. Chairman, we also agreed that there was a need as a country to protect small depositors. And so we passed the Deposit Protection Act in order to give meaning to the protection of savings of our people, so that things that happen, like happened with DKM, would have been easily addressed through that provision. But we didn't end there. We realized that we needed to take a very strong fiscal action. And so we promulgated and came to Parliament and got the Energy Sector Levies Act passed. This was to provide flows of money in order to fund the energy sector SOEs, in order to reduce their debt in the banking sector, provide liquidity to the banking sector, and clean up the balance sheet for them to be on their own in the SOEs. Our colleagues resisted us to the hilt, but once we believed in our course of action, we survived it. Today, they are not only using it, they are mortgaging it for the next 10 years with a bond. I recall also that a decision was taken to pursue the option of raising bonds to pay for the debt that government owed to SMEs. Together, these two activities were to generate about 8 billion Ghana cedis that would have enabled the banks to capitalize with their own money without having to go down like they have done. But we also believe that it was important to introduce minimum capital in order to strengthen the capital base of our banks. In this regard, Mr. President, your team worked very hard to ensure that we agreed a minimum capital requirement of 230 million, not 400 million, and there was a reason. We agreed that not all banks require the same capital. And so whilst we provided a base of 230 million, we will then work with individual banks to determine their levels of risk and be able to determine the appropriate capital that particular bank needs in order to have small and big banks operate in a risk-free environment. We call that the internal capital assessment, project, which was meant to enable us actually handhold the banks and work with them to come out of the challenges and not to collapse them at the least excuse. And so, fast forward, when we lost power, these people took over. When they took over, it was tug of war between shareholders, directors, and banks. They introduced a minimum capital, and they were so impatient they couldn't wait for the time to come. So anytime they look at the watch, how many days are we left? So we're left 4 months. Let's go and tell them that it's left 4 months. So. And when they do that, of course, depositors become alarmed. So they go and take the monies from the bank, and the banks become weaker. So the end result is that the country had to go through a very difficult period of this exercise. The end result of this is that as a poor country as us, we have so far, by the end of 2019, we would have spent 20.46 billion. 20.46 billion would have spent by this country by 2019 just to collapse the banks. And we were in search of how much capital. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia tells us that the capital that we gleaned out of this was about 4 billion. I have a table that will show you that out of that money, only 2 billion was what we realized from fresh injection. The other was sitting on the books of the banks who just transferred to their capital. So in search of 4 billion, as per Bawumia's figures, we spent 20.46 billion to look for 4 billion. Adam Smith, even in his peers, in those days, they would have sacked him from Ghana before he destroys the country. But we are in a democracy, so we can't do that. But we also realize that even in an attempt to address this problem, there was serious political victimization. Some people were described in various forms in order to take their banks. We are aware of the instance of Heritage Bank where they said once you have a case in court, they must as well declare that you are not fit and proper. We recall that they said somebody has about 60 or 70% in a bank, and so the bank is overexposed to that person. But I have on authority somebody who has 99% of a bank, with his wife holding 1%. And that bank is still alive. So the challenge we have had with our banking sector is not just the fact that it has eroded confidence, but the performance. And I want to show a video here, a chart, it will show you clearly that, Your Excellency, your banking sector that you left is the envy of today. Okay, so these are the bank's capitalization. They transferred 2.4 billion straight from their books. They didn't bring anything. You can go to the next one. Yes, this is the fresh injection that came, 2.2 billion. So where is Baumia getting the 4 billion from? This is all we got as cash. And I've shown you all the banks. You can verify. Let's move to the next slide. And so this is a sign, a bar chart of basically showing the composition of our recapitalization. But this is it. Look at the amount of money that I have indicated against the collapse of the banks. The total for 2019 is 8.5 billion. More to be wasted on collapsing financial institutions. So a country that cannot provide printed material for students to write exams before they go home, and they are now learning through the chalkboard. This is what we are doing with our money. Interest component alone will amount to 20 billion in 10 years. In 10 years, our children will pay 40.48 billion Ghana cedis from this reckless activity. Couldn't you have saved all these banks with this money? But where are we? This is what we have done. Somebody must explain what exactly is the motive behind this. This cannot be a reform. But let's go to the next slide. I think you left that one at the top. The one that is showing the banking sector performance. You have to go back. If you can go back. Go back. Let me see. Yes. Your Excellency, the blue line is your performance. The red line is Adam Smith's performance. Who can go and bring Adam Smith's children to come and show us the one they like? I am sure they will pick the blue one. So you can see the asset growth. We were growing at an astronomical level with the weaknesses. Advances, we were doing so well. Almost every indicator, even non-performing loans, you will see that we're doing 17%, they are still doing 18% something percent. But do you know why they are getting the 18%? You see, if you are a student at a university and you get A, and you get 1C, what happens to you? What happens to your grade point? You will become a third-class student, right? So when you remove the C, what happened? You are a first-class student, right? So they have removed all the C. In our own, the C's are still there. All the banks that they collapse are the C's. In order to show up, we still have the weak banks in there, and this is our performance. So they should stop telling people that they have created a strong, solid, and sound banking system. No. The facts don't speak for this. And we can't spend that kind of money to be in this mess. I'd like to move on and look at a major part of our situation today, which is what we call the external sector vulnerabilities. I'm trying to jump a lot of things because time is not on our side. There is a major challenge to our country today, and that is the fact that our vulnerability has elevated beyond the 2015 levels. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If you look at, I think somebody showed the gross international reserves earlier. If you can go back to it. Your reserves, your gross reserves, gives you an indication of the size, the possible obligation that you would get if people decide to reverse these flows back to where they came from. And so when you have a lot of people, currencies that are sitting in your country that is not for you, you have to build buffers in order to safeguard a sudden reversal of those flows so that you are protected. That is why we build reserves. So you will notice that in 2015, when we had the height of the challenge, national reserves is our defense. And as we grow it from 54 to 56 to 60, we are building the fitness of our defenders to protect the city. So suddenly, our fitness level is dropping. Our defenders are becoming weak. The hair will be collecting balls from the net as if we're playing cricket match. So you see where the city is. It is not by chance. The numbers and the data show that this is a reflection of the fundamentals of our economy. And yesterday, I saw somebody struggling to swallow what? I couldn't get it. He said it's about external shocks. Since when did that become a factor? So, Adam Smith, this is your terminal report. Mr. President, when you were the coach of Ghana, this is what you did for Manchester United. Adam Smith has reduced Manchester United to Stoke City. And when you ask him, he's celebrating because that is the level of his competence. We can't force him. But, Mr. President, the picture is very, very gloomy. You need to understand the dynamics of your external environment in order to fashion out appropriate monetary policy stance to anchor this. You see, when they came, they said you were incompetent. They started reducing interest rates. Is that not it? Yes. Fine. Policy rate, cut. Policy rate, cut. There's a table. If you can go to that table, I'll show His Excellency something. If I can get that table. Mr. President, when you are managing monetary policy, you have to address the concerns of several stakeholders and constituents that have interest in the country. And so in a situation where you have a lot of foreigners having a lot of stake in your economy, monetary policy must address their sentiments. Otherwise, they will collapse your economy and your city. Only a few days ago, I heard the central bank, when he was asked a question, say that he doesn't take monetary policy decisions because of, foreigners. But let's look at this. Just look at this picture. Our domestic debt. Foreign investors are holding 30% of our domestic debt. If you add that to the external debt below of 21,650, you will get about 27.2 billion of our debts are in the hands of foreigners. They constitute 68% of our total debt portfolio. These are in foreign currency. If these people are angry today, and they move the money, we are dead. You see, and you say you don't care about these people. After you have handed our economy to foreigners, you are not saying you don't care about them. They will show you. So that is the level of our vulnerability. We are 68% dependent in our decision-making on the sentiment of the foreign investor. In fact, Ave Analytic indicated in a recent survey that Ghana is a safe country with the worst vulnerability to foreign sentiments. Adam Smith must understand this. The Bank of Ghana governor must understand this before he cut our policy rate to kill the country. So when I keep asking him to make sure that your policy rates are anchoring the vulnerabilities of our country, this is exactly what I mean. If you look at our debt to GDP, you see the debt there, I will show you how I got it. Take the Monetary Policy Committee's summary of economic and financial data. And that is the data Baumia used. Because Baumia was coming to do a lecture, they stopped our public debt in December. And when they stopped in December, after the, what do they call that thing? After the domestic debt, they reported up to March. But after the external one, they stopped in December. But they remembered that they had borrowed 3.7 billion, which they added to their reserve and showed that the reserve is high. So me too, I added it. And when I added it appropriately, based on the old series, our debt to GDP is 58%, but Omia reported 48%. And for this 58%, I actually picked it from Bank of Ghana. If you take the old series, when we had no rebase, if we were going to go without a rebase, Ghana's debt to GDP would have been 72%. We are back to the election year, and we have not yet had an election under them. So, Adam Smith, are you seeing these numbers or you are seeing something else? That is the reason they are cooking the numbers and they are not reporting the full extent of our debt. But, Mr. President, what is even worse after of this is that we are now beginning to see over-concentration of our external debt. What it means is that only a few people are now holding our external debt, and Ghana's destiny is tied to the Franklin Templetons and 2-3 other investors. So the whole of 2016, we woke up one day and Franklin Templeton came in $2 billion, and we're laughing. We're adding to our vulnerability and concentration risk. In that year alone, they did tap issue of 25 billion Ghana cedis. That is just calling a friend and giving him bonds, 25 billion. So apart from having this challenge, that has to be addressed in order to give Ghana independence in terms of policy making and in terms of our ability to manage the vulnerabilities of our country. We are now dependent on 2 or 3 investors who can manage us like kids. If they decide that their interest is now better served in Southeast Asia and they come to take their money, the city will disappear. This is the state of our Ghanaian economy. And this is not the one to be celebrating. But only recently they came to celebrate what they call the hat trick. Mr. President, that was a hat trick of embarrassment. You see, the first one is that they were celebrating the stability of the city. How can you celebrate something that had just, you see somebody is sick, you take him to the hospital, you inject him. You don't even have the cure. He comes, so he gets better for 1 week, and you say you have stabilized, you are coming to celebrate. The next morning, the person dies. So, at the time they were celebrating, the city was secretly climbing back to where it belongs. And now we are back to our record. The worst performing currency, not just in Africa, but the 4th worst in the whole world. And we were celebrating this embarrassment with kinky and fish. Mr. President, the next embarrassment that we saw was that we were celebrating because we went to borrow. But it was not because we went to borrow. You see, let me tell you something about these people. And Your Excellency, you know this. When a country is in a funded program, you are on an IMF program, and you are looking to go and borrow money in the market, and the IMF is going to sit, executive board is going to sit on your case, you wait for them to finish because any positive news will give you a reduction in your coupon. It feeds confidence into the market. Is that not what you do? So how come these people knew IMF was going to sit on the 20th and they borrowed on the 19th? Have you asked that question? Somebody is going to tell the whole world that you have done so well that they should give money to you at a lower price. Because you know the verdict is going to be terrible, you decide to do it quickly before you are found out. And then you come and celebrate this one. But, Mr. Chairman, the irony of all of this is that a country as small as Benin went on the Eurobond market a few days before us and borrowed 500 million euros, oversubscribed by 4 times, and they got 5.6% interest rate. Mr. Speaker, a few days before we borrowed, Bloomberg reported that Côte d'Ivoire decided not to go ahead with this bond program because the interest rate was high. When we checked, it was 5.6% that our neighbors said it was too high. We went and gave 8.9%. And you say it is oversubscribed. Who doesn't chase for cheaper things? If you take your bonds and they are so cheap, you are giving free money of about 3% more, which investor will not come? In fact, they were running over each other because they had found this lame antelope that was available to be hunted. And after you have been hunted and you manage to escape, the next moment they hear that you are celebrating. They are now waiting for you for your next bond. They didn't know that 8.9 was cheap. How can we do this to ourselves? And it was also because they knew that a few days' time we were going to win another award. That award was actually coming from no other person than the United Nations. We were declared as the only country in West Africa to be at risk of death distress. Your Excellency, the country that you left that was in safe hands is now about to enter the international mortuary. Chances are that we may have to sell our illness to the international community to forgive us because we can't pay. We are the second in the whole of Africa. Why do we keep scoring these goals? And then when we finish, we celebrate it. So how many have I mentioned? Mr. President, I think I have taken quite a lot of time. I'll try to wind up, even though there are a lot of issues. The country at this point in time is on crossroads. We are confronted with a very severe fiscal environment that is creating a quagmire for us. We have come to a point where we have left the IMF without achieving the objectives of the IMF program. As a matter of fact, the IMF at a point got tired with that and said, you are a very difficult student, you can't even pass, go. But Mr. Chairman, the risk of it all is that the managers of the economy don't seem to know where they are. And that is a much, much bigger problem than the fact that we have a problem. It is my wish and my hope that with your able leadership and your commitment to hard work, which you have demonstrated over the years, the National Democratic Congress will return to save Ghana from collapse. But whilst we work for the people of Ghana to bring us to power, we are interested in the good of Ghana. We will not come back to power because the MPP has failed. No. We will come back to power because we have superior programs and our track record will speak for us. And so, in the meantime, we'll recommend to government to urgently consider the recommendations of the IMF in order to save this country from collapse. We want to encourage the government, even as it pursues the option of improving the lives of our importers, which we strongly support because we have always fought them about this. We believe that the reasons given to be able to find the additional revenue to plug that loophole is untenable. In fact, Mr. President, Adam Smith says that when he reduces his import duty, traffic that was going to a free port in Togo, a free port will be directed to our port because at least they'll pay something. Hey! Who has ever left free and come to pay something? So, Adam Smith, your reason for plugging the loophole is a sign of fiscal recklessness. And you must think about it and think about it well because you have brought these importers to this level. They were not here. You began to manipulate your benchmark rates and you yourself admitted that you are now 200% more than others. So if you want to address your ills, address them. But don't do that in a populist manner. Especially when we know that the announcement you have made will lead to almost nothing in some instances. And in many of the cases, negligible. My only fear is that we will be back to the 2017 budget at Abosokai. But you see, they have managed the expectations of the people. And then 2020, they'll come and, Baumia, he will come and promise everything again. Please, the people of Ghana, whilst I wind up, Minuanuma, Moha, and Comodie, and ye, and Comotintia, Yenua, Penny, Ghana, Shenisa. Onona, Oye, or Sia Dio. Ghana, say, I call him a bekoya, a onwa. Yamia Adom 2016. No, I say, Onona, we are seeing Onima Diachin Obia, Eka Ghana Sikasemwa. Yadinaba. Yadinaba, no, my sister Mutimu saying. And so, when I buy no boat, say, on say, you want to say, akutre say ofridua so be bofom na obi ambo na baso ono abebo na baso entendo amobo ma baso na nsema ye kan nyina ne say wo hwe esikasem no a enkoyie sesi anim guase na omde adare da bia ebe sori bia ye se Ghana ye ne ye last bibim ye se esikasem ahwe a na nse ya hwe kora be frɛ amansan na omaba bebo anya sa ye ntimi hwe ye man mo nyina so munim adwumaden a NDC edebo a Ghana enti enne ye pese Ghana fo hu nsusua eda NDC amamuo mu eni nsusua eda MPP amamuo onim se NDC me menye nipa bia wa NDC ye ka akukuda mo NDC a me shabontin omokora nya mpie mai enti se ka so mo mema no wo he na sisi a maje edwom afei sisi a o ma say esikasem enti ye bompa ye se afei ebe mumia moni na yentu sankofo ifranya sa ye madache enkoni ye maya ye da mase bebre
Wait a minute. That's a minute.